I'm Derrick Blakely, the CBS2 political reporter, and this is Ed Marshall, who is the political producer at CBS2 Chicago. And we're going to be talking for the next few minutes about some of the top races in the Illinois primary, which of course is just 1 week away from today. It seems like we've been waiting for this day for quite a while because there has been so much political advertising, more than we've really ever seen up until this point, particularly in the governor's race.
Derrick, let's kick off with the Democrat side. Just the primary alone, we've estimated that $90 million has been spent so far in the primary alone. And this race, if it goes the distance, is on pace to be the most expensive statewide race in U.S. history. It could top $300 million.
Which is an insane amount of money, especially when you consider there's a general election yet to come. So let's talk about some of the dynamics in this race. Let's start on the Democratic side, because we expected a lot of action there, and there has been a lot of action. We've had
two lead changes.
Right, exactly.
Among the challengers. So in other words, we started off with a strong Pritzker right out of the gate. Then we had a strong second place position by Dan Biss, the state senator, the middle class candidate from Evanston. Suddenly, in the last few weeks, polls are showing that Chris Kennedy has gone from a distant third place to a competitive second place. So at this point, it appears that despite all the $63 million plus that J.B. Pritzker has spent simply on a primary, he's in for a contest next Tuesday night.
And of course, Biss has actually outraised Kennedy. And yet Kennedy has been depending from the very beginning on the strength of that iconic name, that political family name that he has which he carries, excuse me, I'm still working on my voice here. And it particularly resonates with African-American voters, and particularly older African-American voters, who of course are the ones who are most likely to vote. He has pitched his campaign really to issues that resonate with the African-American community. And of course, J.B. Pritzker got in trouble when those tape recordings were released, those FBI recordings, his conversations with imprisoned former Governor Rod Blagojevich, in which he spoke really disparagingly about African-American politicians in general.
He used the expression that Jesse White was the least offensive of African-American candidates they could find to fill Barack Obama's Senate seat. I think that's going to come back to bite him.
And of course, after that, he launched an apology tour in which he met both publicly and privately with African-American leaders, power brokers, ministers, and began saying mea culpa, mea culpa. But what is on tape is on tape. It's very hard to erase or get out of the mind. And I wouldn't be surprised if we heard a lot of that sound being repurposed again toward the end of the campaign, just to remind voters what they said. And of course, Chris Kennedy is reaping hay from that, and Daniel Biss is trying to as well. Another factor in that race, of course, beyond the money, has been what is the influence of Mike Madigan? Mike Madigan has been a kind of a presence in this race, even though he's not on the ballot, because both Kennedy and Daniel Biss have taken on Speaker Madigan, basically saying that he's too powerful, both in his role as Speaker and as chairman of the Illinois Democratic Party.
Derrick, you could argue that Mike Madigan's presence exists on the Republican side in the primary between incumbent Bruce Rauner and this spirited challenger, Jeannie Ives. In fact, this morning you spoke with Jeannie Ives. What did she say about that?
Well, she says it's absolutely ridiculous that Governor Rauner has tried to brand her as Mike Madigan's favorite candidate as a Republican. She really has no ties to Mike Madigan, but since Madigan is kind of the bête noire, the boogeyman on the Republican side, Rauner has resorted to trying to link her to Mike Madigan to gain or further his advantage over her.
Now, do you think that she's competitive in this race? Do you think that she might actually push Rauner into a long night next Tuesday?
Well, I think she is certainly more competitive than anyone thought she would be. And she's certainly more competitive than Bruce Rauner thought she would be. And we see that because he has now taken to attacking her, both in television ads and in mailers that's going to homes. So if you think you have a huge advantage over an opponent, the first thing you do is ignore them. He has found that he cannot ignore Jeannie Ives. Now, what the final vote totals will be, we'll have yet to see, but Jeannie Ives' message resonates among the most conservative Republicans, and those are going to be the ones who are most motivated to vote in this primary.
Now, if we turn to another one of the top races, we're taking a look locally here in Cook County at a rather obscure office that's drawn a lot of attention, Cook County Assessor. This is simply the place that decides how much your property is worth and helps others decide how much they can tax you. But for the first time, we see this grizzled incumbent, Barrios, under attack from this newcomer, Fritz Kagi. How do you see that race playing out?
Well, it's going to be very interesting. I think, frankly, I think Joe Barrios is in for the political fight of his life and trying to really rescue his career. He has come under attack on a number of fronts. One, his close association, again, with Mike Madigan, but also more substantially, the way he has run this office and property tax assessments.
Do you think he was hurt by those studies that came out that showed that the way the properties are assessed in Cook County tends to favor the wealthy who can then appeal their taxes and harms lower income people who may not have that advantage and ultimately wind up paying a higher proportion through their assessment? You think that hurt him at all?
Oh, it has hurt him greatly. That's certainly not a good message for a Democrat to carry. Basically, he's being called a Robin Hood in reverse.
Hurting the little guy that he's supposed to represent.
And favoring the rich. So that's very tough to reverse. Nobody knew who Fritz Kagi was before he got into this race. He's an investments manager, a wealthy investments manager, who has poured a substantial amount of his own money into this campaign. So he's definitely got Joe Barrios on the run, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Barrios, of course, is not only the assessor, he is also the chairman of the Cook County Democratic Party, which means the remnants of the traditional machine is going to be working the streets to try to turn out the vote for him.
Now, let's turn again to another top race, which is the 3rd Congressional, which is the old, I call it the Lipinski family seat, because Father Lipinski held that seat for almost 20 years and then found a way to hand it to his son, Dan, who now is the incumbent, and he's seeking his 8th term. He's under attack by a pro-choice candidate named Marie Newman out of LaGrange. And this race has national overtones. How do you see that race playing out on election night? Do you think that Lipinski can hold on? He has rarely suffered any sort of primary challenge. He's even gone a couple times without a general challenge.
He's under great pressure, too. I mean, Bill Lipinski really is kind of a unicorn in the Democratic Party. He's a basically...
Bill the father.
No, I mean...
You mean Dan?
Dan, excuse me. Because he is basically a pro-life Democrat, which are and there are very few of them left in the Democratic Party. But he has been a very good steward to his district, which is largely a white ethnic district in the city, and then also extends out into the suburbs. He's been the steward of the federal funds for Midway Airport and for transportation in general. That's what he has staked his claim on. He's kind of an old-time politician, bringing home the bacon to the district.
So one of the arguments that the national Democratic influences here, like Kirsten Gillibrand and Nancy Pelosi and others, and even some of Lipinski's own members of the Illinois delegation, are saying that he's now out of step with the mainstream of the Democratic Party nationally, and he's got to go. Do you think that resonates with voters in the 3rd District who have stood for those ethnic white values, the Catholic Church, hard work, economy? You think those values now are old-fashioned and are going out as well?
Well, I don't necessarily think that is an issue that's going to resonate with those voters. I mean, I think the key for the voters is whether their needs are being met. And we will see, I mean, again, it's not just a city district, it's also a suburban district. I think that message may resonate more in some of the suburban areas than it does in the city. He has traditionally had a strong get out the vote machine himself. So he's going to have to rely on that, really, to try to save his career and his congressional seat.
Now let's turn to Attorney General. We have 8 candidates on the Democratic side vying to replace Lisa Madigan, who mysteriously announced that she was not going to run for re-election. Let's break that down. It's a varied group of individuals. Frankly, all of them are qualified.
Well, that's the interesting thing. I think in a normal year, any of these candidates would be widely acceptable to the Democratic electorate. And because there is not much daylight between them on policy positions, they're struggling to kind of come up with differences of emphasis to resonate with voters in an attempt to get over the hump. And when you've got so many candidates, obviously you don't need that big a slice of the vote to actually win.
So how do we handicap at this point what Tuesday night might look like to voters?
Well, the perceived frontrunners are the former governor, Pat Quinn, and also State Senator Kwame Raoul, who has won the endorsement of a lot of county political organizations as well as the Cook County Democrats. Pat Quinn, of course, has huge name recognition. He has won state office as state treasurer and lieutenant governor, and of course became governor as well after Rod Blagojevich went to prison. So he has huge name recognition. He is an old school kind of populist, but many people think his reputation was damaged somewhat by his governorship and the fact, of course, that he couldn't beat Bruce Rauner to retain that.
Now, we have a lot of women in this field vying to replace Lisa Madigan. I wonder if gender plays a role.
Well, I think the two women are certainly trying to make it a role. We're talking about Highland Park Mayor Nancy Rotering, who has trumpeted the gun control issue and the ban on assault weapons, which Highland Park instituted, and also Sharon Fairley, who is the former head of the police oversight agency in Chicago, both COPA and IPRA. She's cutting a kind of an independent swath in this, and as an African-American woman, if elected, she'd be the first African-American woman to win a nomination and perhaps win the office. Although, if she won the primary, she very likely might face another African-American woman in the general election. That's Erica Harold, who is the endorsed Republican candidate and the former Miss America.
With a Harvard Law degree.
With a Harvard Law degree.
And so we have candidates on both sides who seem to be extraordinarily qualified. In a way, it's a shame because to see so much pent-up ambition waiting for Lisa Madigan to step aside, there are going to be 7 losers on the Democrat side, all of whom are prepared for a robust political career in the future.
Yeah.
Where do they go?
Again, all of them, I think, are qualified to do the job. And it's going to be interesting to see who actually rises to the top. You have seen in this race a lot of the candidates kind of coalesce to attack Pat Quinn, and to a lesser extent Kwame Raoul, which is one sure sign that they believe, the other candidates believe, that they are the front runners at this point.
Now let's wrap up our 5 top races with the 4th Congressional. Luis Gutierrez, who's not quite retirement age, he's 63, he also decided that he doesn't have the fire in the belly anymore, and that allowed almost an open season to replace him in this unique district that was gerrymandered to make sure it was a Hispanic majority district. It runs from Humboldt Park and Pilsen on the east all the way out past Cicero and a number of other Hispanic majority districts. Chuy Garcia, who has been known as a progressive liberal for 4 decades, seemed to go for the old Chicago way when he was appointed, or anointed, not appointed, anointed by Luis Gutierrez to be his hand-picked successor. What does that say about this primary, and how do the others compete?
Well, you would think that Chuy Garcia would have an obvious advantage. Again, he has great name recognition, not only in the district but also citywide, because he challenged Rahm Emanuel for the mayoralty, and he has progressive credentials like Luis Gutierrez that go all the way back to Harold Washington. He was one of the chief supporters of Harold Washington within the Hispanic community. But he is finding that is not necessarily accepted by kind of the new wave progressives in the party, and he is gaining challenge as well for this seat. Ed mentioned...
You have Sol Flores, a young woman who has neighborhood community organizing credentials.
And a well-respected neighborhood organization as well.
And you have Rich Gonzalez, who is part of the Luis Arroyo mini machine. So what do you think it said that Chuy Garcia was willing to take the inside game, the anointment, that then he quit his position on the county board to appoint his protege, Rick Munoz, from city council, so that Rick could appoint someone else or suggest someone. Ultimately, the mayor gets to appoint.
So really what you have is Chuy Garcia playing the old game, basically the game that he kind of railed against for so long, this game of trying to anoint successors and trying to
so going against
manage
type.
the process, right? Exactly. Instead of having kind of an open process, he wanted to try to rig the game, if you want to say, in his favor. Ed mentioned the unusual nature of this district. This is probably one of the prime cases for, you call it gerrymandering. The district kind of looks like the Chicago Bears symbol. It's like a big C with a vacant area in between to try to pick off all the majority Hispanic areas, both on the north and slightly there on the southwest side.
So let's wrap up here. We've got five races that we believe you should be watching this next week leading up to election night next Tuesday. So we'll go over that again. That's governor on the Republican and Democratic side. That's going to be the Attorney General race, Democrat and Republican side. It's going to be the 3rd Congressional of Dan Lipinski and Marie Newman, Cook County Assessor Democratic primary of Joe Barrios and Fritz Kagan. We're going to wind up with the 4th Congressional with Luis Gutierrez, Saul Flores, and Rich Gonzalez.
But there's one thing we should also mention very quickly before we go. We didn't touch on the Republican race on the governor's side, where Governor Rauner is getting a spirited challenge from Wheaton State Representative Jeannie Ives. She jumped into the race, particularly after the governor signed an abortion expansion bill, which Republican conservatives did not want, and no Republican voted for in the state legislature. And she is putting up a spirited race. It'll be interesting to see how well she is able to challenge Governor Rauner,
and get her voters, wherever they may be,
out to the polls
to pull Republican primary votes.
Yeah.
So I think that's it here from CBS 2 at 22 West Washington, and we look forward to seeing you on the web.